Hello! In this video I'm going to discuss sentences that contain multiple conditionals. We've previously looked at sentences that contain one conditional, sentences that contain a negation, sentences that contain a conjunction, and then sentences that contain mixtures of those. But we haven't looked at sentences that contain just multiple conditionals, and that's what we're going to look at now. So we're going to look at some contrasts to get a sense for what they mean and the different ways in which conditionals can be arranged. So consider these two sentences. If my team will lose only if they play poorly, then I'm happy. If this, my team will lose only if they play poorly, then what? I'm happy. If my team loses, so if that, then something else is true, namely, if my team also plays poorly, I'm happy. Okay, these say different things, and it's not entirely obvious what they say, or that they say different things. Well, let's get into it a little bit and verify that they do. So take this sentence first. If my team will lose only if they play poorly, then I'm happy. This is true, as it turns out. Why? Well, let's suppose the antecedent is true. Let's suppose that my team will lose only if they play poorly. It's also the case, as it happens, that they're not going to play poorly. And so they're not going to lose, and that means I'll be happy. And that means that actually that sentence is true. Now let's consider the second sentence. If my team loses, then if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. Is this true? Well, what we have to ask that question is, if the antecedent is true, then is the consequent true? So is it the case that, suppose my team loses, is it then true that if my team plays poorly, I'm happy? Well, that itself is true if its antecedent is true, my team plays poorly, then it's also the case that I'm happy. In other words, if my team loses, then in other words, this whole conditional is true when? Well, when two things happen, my team loses and my team plays poorly, then also I'm happy. So if we want to know whether or not it's true, we can suppose that my team loses and my team plays poorly, and then ask, is this whole thing true? Now, our supposition is contrary to fact because, like we said, they're not going to lose and they're not going to play poorly. But we're going to suppose, okay, fine, but in the case where they do lose and they do play poorly, what happens? Well, like we said, I want my team to win. So in the situation where they do lose and they do play poorly, I won't be happy. So this sentence is false. And what's happening is because these sentences are different, we're asked to consider different things. We want to know if the antecedent is true, is the consequent also true? They have different antecedents and different consequents, so they say different things, and we have to ask different things to find out whether or not they're true or false. So this one, if my team will lose only if I play poorly, then I'm happy. We said that's true. If my team loses, then if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. That's false. They're both grammatical sentences, and they both contain multiple conditionals, but they say different things. One's true, one's false. If they said the same thing, they'd both be true or they'd both be false, but they don't. They say different things. And how is it? Why are they able to say different things? Because the conditionals inside of them are arranged differently. So before we look at how they're arranged differently, I want to consider another contrast. So let's take these two sentences. If I eat well, then if I sleep well, I will feel good. And if I sleep well, if I eat well, then I will feel good. Again, these conditionals also say different things from one another. So let's look at the first sentence. If I eat well, then if I sleep well, I will feel good. Well, this is true. Let's suppose the antecedent is true. Let's suppose the antecedents are true. So we'll suppose that I eat well and also that I sleep well. Well, then I will almost certainly feel good. Unless something quite bad happens, eating well and sleeping well is enough for me to feel good. And so this sentence is almost certainly true. On the rare chance that something else happens to interfere with the good effects of my eating well and sleeping well, I won't feel good. But that's almost certainly not going to happen, and so this sentence is almost certainly true. Now consider this sentence. If I sleep well, if I eat well, then I will feel good. Well, so we want to suppose the antecedent is true and then ask what's going to happen. So we'll suppose that if I get around to eating well, I'll also sleep well. This doesn't say I do eat well, it doesn't say I do sleep well, it doesn't say I don't eat well, it doesn't say I don't sleep well. It says if I were to eat well, then also I would sleep well. But do I eat well? Do I sleep well? It doesn't say. So let's suppose that in fact I do neither. I don't eat well and I don't sleep well. I eat and sleep poorly. Still, if I eat well, I will sleep well if I eat well, but I'm not doing either of them. Will I then feel good? No. I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, I'm not going to feel good. So this sentence might be false. the consequent might be false, I won't feel good, even though the antecedent is true. The consequent might be true. If I did eat well, then I would also sleep well, and then I would feel good. But if I don't eat well, then I may not sleep well either, and then I won't feel good. So if the antecedent is true, how likely is the consequent to be true? Somewhat, but not guaranteed to be true. So the conditional, the whole thing, might be false. So we have, if I eat well, then if I sleep well, I will feel good. We said that's almost certainly true. If I sleep well, if I eat well, then I won't feel good. This might be true, but it might also be false. So if the one sentence is almost certainly true and the other sentence might be false, then they say different things. And again, they say different things because they're arranged differently. And in particular, the conditionals inside of them are arranged differently. So let's look at how we might symbolize some of these sentences, and let's look at the two team sentences to do that. So we have, if my team loses, then if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. So we have, and we'll use P will be my team loses, Q will be my team plays poorly, and R will symbolize I'm happy. So if we look at this sentence, we have if, an if at the beginning, and then a then shortly thereafter. And then after the then, we have another little if sentence. So that means that the initial if gives us the antecedent, the then gives us the consequent of the sentence itself. So we have my team loses, arrow, if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. And the if my team plays poorly, I'm happy, that's what the then attaches to. And so that conditional, if my team plays poorly, I'm happy, that goes in the consequent. Okay, now when we look at the consequent, we have, if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. Well, that's another conditional. The antecedent is what the if attaches to, which is my team plays poorly. So we have my team loses, arrow, and then inside of the parentheses, my team plays poorly, arrow, I'm happy. And now we are down to our atomic English sentences, and so we can replace those with our sentence letters, and we have P, arrow, if Q, P, arrow, parenthesis, Q, arrow, R, close parenthesis. So we have a conditional, the antecedent is P, the consequent is the unit, Q, arrow, R. And we make the consequent a unit because we took Q, arrow, R, and we put parentheses around it. That makes it a unit, and then we can then put that in the consequent of another conditional and put the P in the antecedent. So this is a conditional whose antecedent is P and whose consequent is Q, arrow, R. Let's look at the other sentence. If my team will lose, only if they play poorly, then I'm happy. Okay, so we have we have this if at the beginning, and that then hooks onto my team will lose only if they play poorly, and then we have the then, and then the then hooks onto I'm happy. So we have an if, blah, 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 if my team, blah, 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 play poorly, comma, then I'm happy. So that my team, all the way to play poorly, that's what the first if attaches to. The if attaches to the antecedent, so we have my team will lose only if they play poorly, arrow, I'm happy. Okay, so now let's look at the antecedent. My team will lose only if they play poorly. Well, that's an only if in there, and only if attaches to the consequent. So the consequent inside in the first part of the sentence is going to be they play poorly. So we have my team will lose, arrow, they play poorly, inside of parentheses, making it the antecedent, and then we have arrow, I'm happy. And now we're down to atomic English sentences, and we turn those into sentence letters. So we have the conditional P, arrow, Q, inside of parentheses, and then arrow, R. And in this case, the antecedent is a complex conditional, and the consequent is just R. So if we compare these two, we have, if my team will lose only if they play poorly, then I'm happy. That's a conditional whose antecedent is a conditional. If my team loses, then if my team plays poorly, I'm happy. That's a conditional whose consequent is a conditional. And so because they differ in this way, one is a conditional that has a simple antecedent and a complex consequent. One is a conditional that has a complex antecedent and a simple consequent. They say different things. Even though they're both conditionals with conditionals inside, and even though they both have P, Q, and R, they're arranged differently, and so they say different things. So when you're symbolizing multiple conditionals, you want to pay attention to what do the conditionals attach to. In particular, for example, what do the ifs attach to? If there are thens, what do the thens attach to? If there are only ifs, what do the only ifs attach to figure out what goes where. And you also want to remember, if attaches to the antecedent, only if attaches to the consequent. And we'll also see sentences like this in the derivation system, and if we're going to do modus ponens, we need to be clear about which is the antecedent and which is the consequent. And we will see that in some of the derivation examples, which I will be doing in a separate video. So good luck with your symbolizations.